Hello, everyone. Let's start this lecture with a question. Why do you think ethics matter if they matter at all? You might be thinking that ethics are about big, dramatic actions, things like saving lives or standing up for justice. But here's the truth. Ethics matter because you are always making choices. Every single day, in small ways and big, you are choosing. And every time you choose, you are making an evaluation. So when you choose A instead of B, what does that mean? Well, it means that you've decided that A is more important to you than B was, and you've made a value judgment. Now that tells us something pretty big. You already had values, and every choice you make is guided by these values, whether you realize it or not. But here's the next challenge. If you value one thing more than another, and we all do, then how do you decide which value wins when they conflict? Well, we solve that normally by creating a hierarchy of values. It's not just that we value things, it's the order that we put them in that determines what we do. And here is something crucial. Even if two people share values, if they order them differently, they will act very differently. Let's use an example. Thomas Jefferson wrote that famous line, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So let's assume that that's the order that he meant them in. Life comes first, liberty is second, and pursuit of happiness is third. That ordering tells us about Jefferson. So now let's ask the question, would that ordering make a good soldier? Probably not. A soldier who put their life first will run away as soon as the shooting starts. But now think about Captain America. What does he value first? Captain America values liberty first, life second, and then pursuit of happiness third. And that's why he risks his life for liberty. The ordering of values shapes who you are. Now let's go ahead and flip that. If you put pursuit of happiness first, life second, and liberty third, what kind of a person do you get? Well, that would be someone whose greatest goal is pleasure, and they're willing to risk their life and freedom for it. That's a drug addict. That's a crackhead, willing to die or go to jail to chase a high. The values are the same, but the different ordering gives us completely different people. Here's another image to help you. Imagine your hierarchy of values as a pyramid. At the top are your highest values, and lower down are less important ones. But this pyramid also has sides. These are boundaries that limit what you are willing to do. So let's go ahead and test those boundaries a bit. Let me ask you a question. What is the cheapest way to end homelessness? Now you might be thinking maybe building affordable housing, increasing mental health services. But what if I told you that technically the cheapest way is to just execute the homeless? That's pretty shocking, right? Well, bullets are cheap, and that makes it far more economic than any of the other options. But we immediately reject that answer, as we should. So why do we reject it? Because we already have a value, human life, and that value puts a boundary on what solutions we're willing to consider. Our pyramid doesn't let us cross that line. Now, if you wanted an even more economic answer, you should sell hunting licenses to hunt the homeless, and that way the government would even make money. But again, we recoil from this. And why is that? Well, because our moral limits reject that solution. And it's not just that we won't do the action. It stops us from even really considering those kinds of actions as legitimate options because they fall outside of our value limits. So the order of our values and the limits that they create determine which answers are acceptable to us. Now, let's go higher up the pyramid. Carl Jung, a famous father of psychology, says that we all have a highest moral value, the thing that we would sacrifice everything else to get, but would never sacrifice it for anything else. And he calls your highest moral value your God. Now, this is not necessarily a religious God, but it functions as your guiding star, and so it has the same function as the idea of God does in religion. So now picture your pyramid with a star above it. That star is your highest moral value. Everything in your life is aimed at that star. And whatever moves you towards that star is good, and whatever moves you away is bad. That is the definition. Now, of course, you have a lot more than just one goal in life. In fact, if you think about it, you have something like a near infinite number of roles that you play, and each one of those has an ideal way that your values tell you to play that role. You are a child to your parents, a sibling to your brothers or sisters, you're a neighbor, a citizen, a friend, a student, maybe you're a significant other to someone. Now, for each of those roles, being the best version of that role is different. You don't treat your siblings the same way that you treat your friends or your boss. And most of us have had the experience of talking with our friends when someone's parent comes in, and suddenly we shift the way we speak and sometimes even the topic that we're talking about. And that's because the role of a friend is different from the role of a child. But each of these roles, if you think about it properly, should be aimed in the same direction as your highest moral value. And that way, no matter what you're doing, you are ideally getting closer to that ideal version of yourself. So you have this visual, where your hierarchy of values pyramid is filled with these little sub-pyramids, each of which is a different role you play, and each has its own ideal version of what you're trying to be. Now let's go ahead and apply this. Suppose you are offered an unpaid internship. Would you take it or not? Is it a good deal or not? Well, it depends. If the internship helps you reach your goals, your star, or rather probably your sub-star, it's good. But if it doesn't align with your goals, then it's bad. An internship in the bricklayer union is only good if you're aiming to be a bricklayer or something in that vein. But if you're not, that's a bad investment of your time. It's the same internship, but evaluated differently based on your pre-existing values. So ethics is really about this: articulating your values, understanding their order, and aiming at your highest moral value. Finally, what does it mean to be rational in ethics? Well, it means that your actions have a coherent justification within your value system. You are acting in a way that makes sense given your values and their order. That coherent justification means that the ideas and actions make sense in relation to the values that you have, and that those values make sense in relation to each other, and that the whole system is properly pointed at the highest moral value. A rationally coherent system is one where, if we know the values, we can understand why people do and don't act in certain ways, and that can only happen if the ideas come together in an understandable way. Over the course of this quarter, we'll take a look at 4 major kinds of ethics systems, and we'll explore the pros and cons of each of them and how it works and fails in the business realm. You'll notice that in our exploration, I will try to build each system up and tear it down. Now, for your part, you don't have to believe in any of these systems or values, and you will see that most of these systems are contradictory to each other, so you can't really believe in more than one anyway. But being able to understand these systems rationally can tell us both what someone who believes in that kind of system will think and do rationally, and will let us understand why they think that. So, ethics is a study of values, their order, and how they guide us to act and to be and become who we believe we should be. And that is where we will start our course.